So we'll just get people in. I think they're just enjoying their cup of coffee and tea, but we will initiate the session. So we have David, of course. He needs no introduction. I'm sure he did a great discussion in the previous panel. So we have five very, very interesting people on the panel. We have Sarthak. Sarthak, please, could you join us on stage? Sanjeev, where is Sanjeev, please? Yes, Sanjeev, if you could just come over, please. Tapan has come all the way from Pune. In fact, everybody has come from outside for this panel, actually. That's something very interesting. But there is one problem here. In fact, all of you have not done enough miles than David to be here. Subhashini, please. And then, of course, Zarir.
Amit's gotten much better at making absolutely sure there's at least one woman on every panel I moderate, because I refuse to moderate a manel. And I'm going to have him start working for 2 next year. So again, I'm going to do something unusual. Did all of you hear the last session, hopefully? Okay, so the last session we didn't have time to answer the question, what are the nano unicorns that particular set of panelists are working on that will help solve one or more of the world's problems? So I'm going to begin this panel by asking each of the presenters to describe their nano unicorn that they're working on. Who would like to go first?
So one data point, rice husk as agricultural waste, India generates about 120 million tons annually. Something that we've been working on for the past 8-9 months is to figure out how we can convert that to commercially viable product. A lot's been done with bagasse, and we've recently had a lot of regulation around plastics, and on the back of that, support from government to say that we need to use a lot less of disposable plastics in railways, etc. And we're very, very close to sort of cracking a technology that gives enough strength to produce disposable product, and we'd love to see that go to scale. Sort of a layer on that for us is that we work very closely with mining communities in India, and a lot of the mining communities are agrarian, and there's a lot of this waste that's not monetized or used by the farmers in any way. So if we can crack this one, I think it could be very interesting.
So I think, David, it would be hard for me to talk about one nano unicorn, but I represent the healthcare sector, and what we have seen is technology has disrupted every single sector. So I see that there's a huge disruption which is happening as we speak, and there are many startups which are actually disrupting and changing the rules of the game. So there are very interesting things happening. Just to let you know something, for example, there are startups which are actually using technology to connect patients and doctors, and many of them have huge potential. And not just that, there are startups which are actually helping the patient be more compliant to his disease, in terms of taking his medications and all. So there's a lot to talk about, and I would not be fair if I just single out one, because there are many more there.
Thanks, David. Thank you. So I think, like you mentioned, the landscape out there is crowded with very many potential nano unicorns. And picking out one is going to be tough, but certainly in the space of agriculture, in the space of water, I think those are the 2 areas where technology and technological disruption can throw out at least, in my mind, a dozen nano unicorns over the next year or 2. It's just that we need to. So for one, for example, is in the space of safe, affordable, clean drinking water, something that one of the previous panelists spoke about, but at a much smaller scale, utilizing at its base a waste product to actually filter water. So when rice is milled, you get rice husk ash, and that can actually be used to filter out water.
Thank you. I think I'm an insurer by profession, and I was also the Chamber's president for Indo-German some time back, and I used to be in Germany with trade delegation, and a lot of the European partners would say India has got huge demographic dividend. It is the country where the future lies. And I would think to myself, yes, but where are the jobs? If we are not able to get jobs, the demographic dividend, as we speak and feel so excited about, can become hugely negative. It can lead to social unrest, it can create huge issues, and having such a huge population, young population, and no answers to what we do with them is going to be a problem. So I thought it's easy to talk about government, it's easy to talk about everybody else. How can we make a difference in delivering that? How can we create employment? And I think that is the time when my team sat together, we created process systems in which we could open virtual offices without a lot of investment in terms of infrastructure, but generate massive employment. And the ambition is that we should be generating 1 million employment in the next 5 years or so as one institution. And since we lead from the front in terms of being the leading insurance company of India, that actually means that others copy it, and that 1 million becomes 10, 50 million. That's a domino effect is what will trigger it. I'm very happy to say that in the past year itself, we opened such 2,000 such offices. We already generate quite a few employment, and now my competitors are copying it onwards. So the effect of a domino effect of the right strategy and getting employment done for India is the biggest issue from my perspective. Then it's a demographic dividend. Then India is arriving in the world scene is what we believe.
I'm Sanjeev from Mahindra EPC Irrigation. With David's permission, I'll talk of 2 nanos, not one. One of the most interesting is, you've got, we work in water, we work with water. So the source of water is always a, problem. It's, if it's groundwater, the depth is going deeper and deeper every day, every month, every year. If it's, reservoir water, then reservoir water itself is immense problems and pressures on need and use. So one of the things we're working on is how do we recharge tube wells which have gone dry so that we can make them more, we can create many more reservoirs and also recharge and bring up groundwater levels. That's a very interesting project. I think it has the scope and the possibility of becoming a good-sized business. The second is something which is similar to what Mr. Langrana was talking about. You have a lot of nallas, in most of our towns and cities. And these nallas are a source of water. Getting them to potable level is huge and a very Herculean kind of a task. It also requires a lot of investment. But getting it to farm usable grade is not such a big deal. That combined with, there are a lot of farmers who have small pieces of land which are fallow or which can't really be used for agriculture. So on small scales of pieces of land, less than 1/8 of an acre, if we can help them set up a small net or a greenhouse, which uses a small STP built on this kind of a source to generate about 8,000 to 10,000 a month by way of income. That's another project that we're working on.
Fantastic.
It's hopefully, that has the possibility also of taking us someplace.
So
Thank you.
that's a very, very good start, instead of just talking about, kind of leadership and stuff like that. Those are actual examples that people are working on. So from the audience, who can name a ultra successful, ultra big nano unicorn that India's created? Not purely in the commercial sector, in the both sector. What's the biggest one probably that India's ever created? Can anybody tell me? It happened 60 years ago. Some guys in the World Food Program had leftover butter and oil. What did they do with it? Amul, yes. the most successful social enterprise in India, Amul, created because some guys at the World Food Program decided to give their extra butter oil and milk powder to India, not to feed people with, but to use as collateral so they could borrow real money and build the professional dairy sector. Now, most of the unicorns you've heard about here are unicorns that are driven by a company. And many of these companies are reaching out in the open innovation mode and seeking other people and other innovation. They're doing all the stuff they've been doing for 20 years. But Amul is an open innovation example between the government, lenders, private sector, it's between the non-money people, the people who are trying to fix the problems. So you get those answers from both sides. And Subhashini's organization is kind of a network of these corporate organizations who are looking to do more. So what I'd like to do now is just go through the speakers again, and I'd like to ask each one of them to describe or ideate or imagine what would the unicorn look like that they would build with the other leaders, with the nonprofit leaders, with the government leaders, with the World Food Program if they're working in agriculture. What would it look like if you said, no, I'm not just going to look at what I can do as a company. I'm going to look at what my company and other companies could do together with all these other players. And just give me some conjectures on what you think you could do or where you would at least like to look at doing something.
So I think probably best to speak from experience. So one grand challenge that we're working on now is in the waste sector. If we sort of look at India's waste problem, it's commonly known statistics, over 100,000 metric tons go to sort of landfill regularly on a daily basis. Much of it is either not processed or poorly collected. So we've been looking at this problem both from a business lens, but also from that of government and infrastructure. And one of the realizations for us is that no one side can do this alone. Often the responsibility for this, civil society thinks sits with government, and government increasingly says the responsibility sits with individuals. We heard earlier in sort of the day about individual social responsibility. And what we've now done in terms of just designing a program that can bring everyone together and make it an investable opportunity is to work with the local government in Mumbai, bring business together that is heavily concerned about waste, particularly packaging waste, and needs to take more responsibility for it, but also other ecosystem players that are bulk generators. So there is a pilot that's just sort of being born, the risk of using the word pilot, in Mumbai with the State Bank of India, with Hindustan Unilever, Mumbai Municipal Corporation, and local civil society, very large residential societies, all coming together to figure out what is that business model that can make it possible for us each to play our role more responsibly in segregating, collecting, and disposing, as well as monetizing of our waste in a more sensible way. And I think if we make models like this work and replicable and scalable, then we're looking at solving a national grand challenge using the lens of business, and hopefully in a competitive environment, able to crowd in more innovation and entrepreneurship in a space at the moment that is just not getting enough funding, enough interest, enough innovation, or enough civic engagement.
So I wanted to speak about the healthcare sector. I mean, I work for Johnson & Johnson, and I head the pharmaceutical business for them. So there's something which I want to speak about, and that's our efforts in the space of global public health. So we are investing a lot in terms of solving some of the world's most complex problems. And when I speak of that, I speak necessarily of epidemics like HIV, Ebola, and this is the area where the world looks to the leadership of companies like ours. So similarly in this space, we have got a lot of efforts going in for tuberculosis. So I'm sure every one of you would have heard that our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi, he has taken this clarion call of eradicating tuberculosis from India by 2025. Now, this is good and this is great because many people don't know the damages which tuberculosis does to the Indian economy. In fact, we are a high burden country. We have more than 25% of the global burden lies in India. And what is worrying is there's a lot of resistance which is developing to the bugs of TB. So we work very closely with the government in terms of raising awareness about tuberculosis. We work with like-minded NGOs, to come and help us and the government, because you just can't leave this to the government. It's too big for the government to step in. So we get a lot of NGOs to see how we can diagnose, treat, and make these people productive and put them back into the society, because it's quite heart-wrenching to see some of the impact which tuberculosis can do. So this is just a thought which I wanted to share here, David.
Thanks. So here's something that I think might qualify as something that certainly India is going to have to look at maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line. We're talking about electric mobility. We're talking about electric vehicles and the very aggressive stance being taken by authorities here to push this through a slew of incentives both at the producer end and at the consumer end to drive this agenda. And electric vehicles require electric batteries. And as electric batteries and vehicles get into the ecosystem, I think what people aren't looking at is what do you do with disposed batteries, batteries that have reached end of life. We already have an issue with lithium-ion batteries in electronics, in consumer electronics, whether it's mobiles, whether it's laptops. The whole recycling value chain opens itself up to disruption and to open innovation. From the point of collection, from the point of responsible collection, which means how do you collect with full traceability? How do you make sure that, for example, child labor isn't being used to collect and segregate? How do you congregate and consolidate the collection? What are the recycling centers that you bring it back to? How do you recycle with a low environmental footprint? And then what do you do with the recycled material? I think the entire value chain is something that really lends itself to various partners coming in at various points in time, very much like the plastic issue today. But it's an issue that's going to hit us 5 years from today. And if we don't start thinking about it and working on it today, while we might be solving one problem, we'll be generating another.
So thank you. I think one problem I spoke about was the demographic dividend. Other problem is you can talk about so many $1 trillion economy, you can talk of us being the 4th largest economy in the world. But if the average life expectancy of Indians is not the 3rd or 4th largest or best in the world, it has no relevance. Now, how do we address that was a challenge that we had in mind. And we started actively pushing for a national health scheme, which came through now, and that covers 40 crore people. About $3 to $4 billion are getting pumped in every year. Now, what's the impact of it? $3 to $4 billion, 5 lakh sum insured at the village level for the poorest person, which means that healthcare and hospitals becomes viable at places not there. I read a news article just about 4 to 5 days back. Apollo is going to invest 300 crores in opening now healthcare facilities in the location where they never thought of. That brings it to that level. All startups in healthcare, and I heard my co-panelists speak about, all integration together, and this will have an impact, at least 5 years increase of life expectancy of Indians, because the difference between high life expectancy and low life expectancy is the access to healthcare. Now the next move that we are pushing through again with the government is, what about the next 40 crores? So this 40 crores is fully subsidized by the government. In US, you have a mandatory employer-employee health insurance. The employer has to take that. Why not in India? No? Why should not be mandatory? Why should not be pushed to that level? Why associations should not have health insurance at the price which is won by a tender, which is 1/6 the actual cost of individual healthcare? Imagine if the next 40 crores comes through that gambit and the money getting pumped into annually moves to $7-8 billion just from the private partnership, and then hospitals come into play. They start opening hospitals. It's viable to have hospitals in a village, not viable. Doctors come into play. The startups come into play. The whole ecosystem, my belief, give 15, 20 years, the life expectancy of an Indian shall move the top 2 or 3 as the economy moves. I think that is the ambition that we are trying to pursue.
One of the things that I would like to, specific to the question that David raised, which is the company or what kind of industry would one like to work with in collaboration? I think, this plan of doubling farmer income is a very doable plan. In the sense, we have all the technologies to be able to grow multifold the kind of output typical farm generates, either by way of precision farming or by way of net housing and greenhousing and protected cultivation. The question that comes up is, okay, you put up a small net house, let's say, or a greenhouse, and from an acre you start getting 2 times to 4 times the kind of produce you are otherwise getting. The question that comes up is, what do you do with this? And that's where we run into a roadblock. We can do all that we need to in terms of either greenhousing and doing aeroponics or hydroponics and jumping up the productivity. But at the end of it, if the farmer doesn't have a market to be able to sell that produce, then he is back to where he was. So if one were to be able to tie up with companies which can lift the kind of produce that you can actually generate, that would be a dream come true for me.
So I'm pretty amazed that Amit got all these leaders up here and they just knocked off, 6 of the SDGs, every one a different one, every one a really interesting scenario. And we could all leave on that really positive note. I'm going to describe 3 situations that aren't happening. I'm going to take a couple of questions, and then I'm going to ask if any of them have some comments on the not happening stuff. Okay? So my belief is that in 2030, we will all look back on the Sustainable Development Goals, and the following thing will happen. We will, at that point, be able to see multiple solutions to those goals. And we will look back and we will say, if we'd actually have concentrated resources and scaled those solutions, we'd have reached the goals. But we didn't. So, doubling farmers' income. If I brought you a product that would double protein and half the amount of fertilizer, and you launched it in one country, it would get killed in every other country in the world. How do you solve that problem? If I told you that the Chinese have an 80 million person job bank, which works under a directed capitalist approach, which unfortunately has the same kinds of results as the libertarian capitalist result or worse. And I said to you, when do you rob the bank? The correct answer is you rob the bank when the money's in the stagecoach. China is putting 20 million jobs in stagecoaches and moving them to Africa. Not a single organization anywhere in the world has showed up to rob a single stagecoach. It's a combination of technology. It's a combination of something like India Stack. It's a combination of a country that already has several hundred factories serving those markets. It's a combination of a country that wants to create hundreds of women-owned producer companies. Anybody in here know a country like that? Ever heard of a country that might have that particular situation? Not happening. I'll just end with 2. There are many, many situations where we are going to have the answers, and we are going to fail in scaling them. So, questions from the audience? Unless, of course, we do something dramatically different. I don't see any hands. Hello? Are you out there?
You really put some points.
This was a question for, I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. No, this was a question for the water, yeah. Okay, so you were talking about enhancing productivity and market linkages. Okay, but that's a problem when you don't change the produce, right? Today, for example, if I talk about productivity, not in terms of yield per acre, in terms of tons or metric tons, but if I talk about it in terms of economic output, you could use a combination of controlled environment plus precision agriculture, and you could take it to very high value items. It can actually be 100-fold. It doesn't have to be 2-fold. Okay, but when you take it to very high value items, then there are a lot of companies who can do deals which can support thousands of farmers. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, actually, if I understand what you're saying right, the problem is multifold. One is high rupees per ton or rupees per kg as an output. That's the first task. And the second task is finding enough buyers for that high rupees per kg output. Now, we don't really need to go into very high rupees per kg output at this stage, because there are enough in the sense of, let me explain a little more. Medicinal plants, for example, is a high rupees per kilo output. Capsicum, cucumber is a not so high, but a decently high as far as the farmer goes. Next is, a tomato kind of in a net house, which is the yield is lower, and finally paddy or rice that is grown on an open farm. So you've got the range.
What about bacterial, yeast, and algal products?
GK, I'm going to ask you guys to take that one offline, okay?
Let's do that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So GK is one of our scale leaders. He's out of Mumbai. He's working with the India Academy of Pediatrics. I believe they are the people who know how to solve stunting. Navneet, who left, is with Kaya Constructs. He's another one of our scale leaders. Commercial toilets, city toilets in over 200 cities in 2 years. Manu, where are you? Manu's with HPP India. The last 2 years, they put 52,000 out-of-school kids onto blankets, 500 blankets in Haryana, and in 2 years moved 32,000 of them back into their age-appropriate grades. Kids working in teams on blankets with a teacher just managing them. They asked for all the teachers to be payroll. They only got half of them, so they got the Queen of Qatar to give them enough money to pay the other half of the teachers. This year, they're back up to 50,000, and 90% of the cost is just regular government budget. It's just being spent correctly. So those are 3 examples where they likely will get scaled. They're not as complicated as the 2 examples I gave you. But everybody on this panel has given you several examples where the only way they happen is if we all get together and focus on actually solving the world's problems. It's okay to make money, but if I buy a Coke and nobody pays for the water, it's free, as Parag pointed out in the last session, and nobody pays for the medical bills associated with the diabetes, except you and I with our taxes, that's not sustainable. So it doesn't always work out that everything gets covered. And you know that every time you open one of those things. So that's the opportunity we have. These are some phenomenal leaders. I'm going to encourage you to talk to them individually, and Amit asked me to end a little bit early. So thanks, gentlemen and lady.
Thank you so much.